Okay, so let me, maybe I will step in and, so let me make a few comments from what I heard. So first, a comment. So I see that some people don't want to get more regulation. I think the problem is that what I heard is that they don't want to have any regulation for the new investment. So of course, if you don't want to have any regulation, that's fine. But if you start from the premise that you will get regulation, because this will not be an outcome, that there will be a complete removal of regulation, some of the things that you said may call for more regulation. Like if you need to protect investment in NGA, if you want to promote co-investment in fibers, there will need to be some regulation in place to determine the rules and determine access, actually, because probably there will be some access rule in this case. So it's not clear to me that even those who want to have less regulation should advocate just no change. That's second, you say we need to be aligned with competition policy. That's true. Now, remind that regulation is an ex-ante regulation, and competition policy is decomposed between ex-ante and ex-post. And so the most relevant part may be merger control. Now, in merger control, this is a time where you can escape a bit from standard rule and impose remedies on companies that are not dominant, especially under the new criteria. And this is always done. This has been done in some of the cases. So there is this case to be made that ex-ante regulation may impose remedies that would not work in ex-post regulation. And this is to draw on the spectrum case. Actually, every time the administration, in a sense, has the ability to intervene on the market in an efficient way, it will do it. So it can do it when it allocates spectrum, so it can put conditions. It can do it when he evaluates a merger, so he can improve efficiency by asking remedies. And he can do it when he's doing ex-ante regulation. So it's not clear to me that you can build an argument that we should just have regular ex-post criteria in this industry. Now, I had a couple of questions about this market definition and joint dominance. Let me start with the first one, so maybe it's one for the regulators, and let me put it like that. Suppose that you have a merger, and antitrust authority has cleared the merger under some remedies. And then you have a market analysis. And the regulator came with a different analysis. So he thinks that there is still joint dominance. What should prevail, given that the analysis of joint dominance is supposed to be done under the same rules? Anybody? I see a view from the DigiCons. Did you connect? Ah, you moved. Ex-DigiCom. So what?
Thank you. The situations are not necessarily the same, and that is clearly written in the framework directive, that a competition law-based analysis may differ in the sector from a regulatory law-based analysis. That we would look at similar factors, competition indicators, that is true, yeah. But a merger analysis compares mainly two events. What regulatory authorities do is a much more forward-looking analysis, at least that is what they should do. And there the analysis, the assessment would or may differ from what the competition authority does. You can say that also a regulatory authority may look into events when the authority would think of a situation without wholesale regulation, for example. What would that do to the retail market? and with wholesale regulation. So there's also kind of comparison of events, if you wish, but it is a different analysis than what a competition law authority would do. So I think that we should keep in mind. We may look at the same indicators from time to time, but the assessment I would hold is different.
So let me address a different question, but it's, which has not been discussed at all. So I would like to see the view of the panelists on this. It's the issue of bundling. So we've been discussing the problem of applying joint dominance, and I will come back on that. But of course, the second issue in the current framework is how do you analyze bundling? It's much more general than the issue for regulators. It's an issue for competition authorities and all dimensions of competition law because it's related to the market definition. And do you think the current regulatory framework allows to address bundling issues in a proper way?
Theoretically, it would be possible. I think no regulator, I wonder if I'm right with all berec regulators, has done it so far. But if you think that the bundle has a significant impact or is a case of concern, yeah, then you should declare a bundle market. And you should say, okay, that's possible under the framework. You know, the market definition list is not finally, you know, so I think if a regulator says in our market, bundling is a significant competition tool, then you could do that. But I doubt if it's, there's a reason that empirically nobody has done it. I doubt that it's like that, you know, because we have seen standalone services quite successful coming up. Netflix is a good example, which don't bundle and are successful, you know, because they take out part of, and also the consumer habits are sometimes, especially within young people, they don't subscribe to bundles, you know, they pick out specific things over the internet and don't subscribe to a bundle. You know, I mentioned it in Austria, there are mobile-only users who have not a fixed access. So a regulator has to consider, you know, I think what I don't like is that we discuss on the remedy level something in bundles, you know, but we didn't do it on the market analysis, you know, and sometimes I think it brings the things from upside down. You can talk about there should not be a mentality, it's nice to have. Huh? So we want perfect competition in this market. Perfect, you know. Maybe if no competition is perfect, why especially the telco market, you know. So it's enough if there is competition, you know, and if there is a significant lack of competition, then we can intervene, you know. But I think it's a completely wrong mindset to say we need always lower prices and perfect competition. That was not the case of the regulatory framework, you know. We want to open up monopolies, we want to have access if there is significant dominance, and that's it, you know. If the market outcome, you know, I always said, when I was a regulator, I said, we are for competition, but we are not to secure every competitor, you know. Because in every competitive market, some competitors always disappear and other competitors pop up, you know. And sometimes I think there is a mentality that all competitors have to be secured. That's not the case.
Well, we have a long tradition in competition policy to say that we need to protect competition.
Competition, yeah.
Not competitors. So
yeah, absolutely.
Mind that. So there are other views on then I move to.
Basically, I agree with what Matthias said. I think there are tools to deal with that if regulators believe that they need to deal with that. Now, I think it's important not to look at bundles as a problem. I think it's a great thing for pro-competition bundles.
No, I say it was a problem. Just ask whether the tools are adequate.
So I think it is something which allows operators to differentiate between themselves and to create a competitive rally between operators. So it's rather a gift, I think, to this industry that this possibility exists. I think we should avoid to have policies where we try to make sure that everybody has the same products, the same services, and that everybody is equal. Because then, basically, why would you still compete? There's just the idea of competition is that you try to bring services to the market, to consumers, that you think you can have a slight edge versus your competitors. So I think in bundling is one of the tools which is very pro-competitive in the competitive scene. So.
Okay, so move on the table.
Is it me? Well, I think that kind of on the face of it, of course, bundles can be very innovative, and I think that bundles can be kind of a differentiator in the market. However, it can also be a tool actually to leverage market power, to kind of cross-subsidize certain elements of the product to include parts which are not replicable. So I think that it is actually quite difficult under today's framework to tackle bundles, and in particular, I think, and BEREC, or maybe it was even ERG beforehand, has been carrying out previously quite significant work on the issue of margin squeeze in bundles. And I think that that is probably an area which is worth revisiting, because we have seen that the market trend has been that we move towards double play, and now I think there is kind of very clear trend towards, and some national markets are almost dominated by triple play, and we're moving into quadruple play. So I think clearly operators should have the possibility to differentiate and to compete, but on level terms, and it should not be a pretext for leveraging market power, uncontrolled market power. Thank you.
But do you think this is the role of the regulator to address issues of leverage of market power, or is it, because this is a traditional role of ex-post competition? So the one question is whether you want to intervene or to include that as a regulatory tool, or let just the competition authority address the issue under standard.
Actually, so I think some
because the bundling issue arises in many industries.
Yes.
This particular issue.
I think that some regulators actually try to address it and make really significant effort, I think, to address bundling and potential leverage issues and bundling. And in particular, I think they look into margin squeeze, and that can be done in the context of regulated markets. So I would refer, for example, I think but I think they are in the room and they know it much better. But for example, I think the Spanish regulator, CNMC, and also the Irish regulator have extremely sophisticated margin squeeze tests. And I think also recently there are other regulators who are looking into even more or equally sophisticated margin squeeze tests, which are looking at also, I think, bundling elements. And I think it is partly the job of the regulator, because I think, as Reinhold has pointed out, regulators tend to look at the markets in a much more forward-looking manner. And if we see that there is a clear market trend towards bundling, and then we see that there are potential competitive failures or leverage effects, I think, in that market, then I think it is something that regulators should address in a forward-looking manner. So I think it is their job. Although in the last review of the relevant markets recommendation, it was concluded that the retail market is not bundles.
Okay, there was some intervention.
It's just responding to the bundling question. I can think of 2 or 3 specific cases where bundling is certainly important, not in terms of defining upstream markets, but in terms of more broadly how we think about competition. The 2 examples are certainly where incumbents bundle at the retail level. That's certainly the case with BT, where British Telecom makes sports content available free of charge as part of a retail bundle to those people who buy broadband. And that does mean that when we think about broadband pricing rules, we need to think about that sport content. We're not trying to regulate it directly, but it's part of the retail cost stack. And that's something which we're in discussion with the Commission on at the moment. It's a quite complicated question. The other area, which I think is very important, is on the demand side. When we think about switching, consumer switching behaviour, which is obviously an important part of competition policy, that is certainly made more complex by the presence of bundling. Again, that's not to say we want to regulate everything. Bundling is often very beneficial, but it can complicate behaviours at the retail level.
So, yeah, I would like to have the view of the mobile, because, of course, so full MVNO, there are 2 types of full MVNO. There is a cable operator who wants to get into the quadruple play, And of course, they're not in the same position as and they're doing bundling.
I think there are more than two types of MVNOs.
Okay, so
Some full MVNOs are in the fixed business as a cable or as a fixed operators, and of course they want to bundle. That's their differentiation, and they want to be triple play, quadruple play, whatever. And I think it's very good. You have some other full MVNO who come with other bundling with other kind of service, whether they want to bundle with OTT services or whether they want to bundle because they are a wholesaler with a loyalty program for the wholesale, whatever. So all bundling is a good way to innovate and bring new services that the consumer or the enterprise will choose, and that's really good. Of course, the big operators now, they tend to go into the triple play, quadruple play strategy. I mean, they all go to it's kind of a mainstream strategy, and that's completely understandable. I think from an MVNO standpoint, that is not really a problem so far. And we see, and depends of country, that start to be a problem that we need to address. Recently in France, we had the case of Completel Numéricable, which is a big fixed operators buying SFR, which is a big fixed mobile operators, but also a big fixed operators. Then we had some remedies because obviously you need to unbundle the fixed part because then it was going to be a market which was blocked. So basically, in short, there's not been a problem so far for the MVNO. I mean, it has not been a big problem. It might be a big problem, and that has to be on a case-by-case, country-by-country. So yeah, and whether it's ex-ante, post-ante, competitive, I don't mind, I don't care. I don't know. I will complain when I'm not happy.
Okay, you have
quite happy to agree with Jacques that from mobile perspective we don't see any problems, or as a general case for any ex-ante intervention on that. And well, there are more than 500 MVNOs in Europe, different ones, full MVNOs, light MVNOs.
Of course, mobile services are already bundled services. So
well, in a way, but it's increasingly challenged as well. So concluding on that, I agree with the previous speakers. Don't need ex-ante intervention on that.
So we're supposed to stop. Let me ask one last question to your views. I mean, do people think it is time to incorporate the OTT into market analysis? So, of course, OTT are very different. Huh? They are ultimate MVNOs. They don't have network at all. But they do provide communication services, but they do not provide access to consumers. So the question is whether we should focus on those operators, that whether there is this market, large market, not in terms of competition policy definition, where for the access to consumers, where all companies compete to provide individuals to content. Or whether we have also specific market for telecommunications, where this OTT now start to be active, and we can predict that they will be extremely active in the short term. I say that.
I mean, if you look at the innovation from the OTT, that's come from the US, so we can question ourselves why nothing come from Europe, and maybe we do something wrong about that. It's true that the regulation don't really take that into account, and I remember to have some concern about the European regulations on roaming, where basically I say, what about thinking about kind of industrial policy? I mean, if we do a regulation by regulating such a rate or by pushing local breakout, what does it mean? Myself, I was expecting that Google and Apple being in the best position to leverage on local breakout. It did not happen, so I was wrong. But when I say, what about to speak about that? I say, no, we do regulation, we don't do industrial policy. And as a European, where we need to protect our trade balance, I think we need to put more industrial policy into the regulations to try to define, if we regulate, what is the impact in terms of industrial policy, at least to protect Europe. because we know that you have some Chinese and some American and some Russians which are benefiting from the regulatory, the new regulations on roaming. Now, is it good or is it bad?
Do you think that US industrial policy is responsible for the development of internet services?
I don't know what they are doing in the US. I say just in Europe, and I take the example of European regulations on roaming. That was visions of regulatory visions, purely looking at Europeans between themselves. And there were some, that was not possible to discuss about what is the impact, how US players, the OTT players, the Apple, the Google, how are they going to react to new regulations in Europe? What will be the impact at European level?
Yes, I see a lot of reaction. Let's continue.
You, sir? Yeah, I think Google, you say the OTT have no networks. Let's start with this point. I'm a little bit doubtful. You know that Google in the US already start even to have fiber networks in Kansas, in Austin, and so on. I don't know if they will do it here, but they have a backbone network. And what we see with OTT, especially with the big OTTs, that they're getting closer and closer with their backbones. Otherwise the whole systems wouldn't function. Netflix is responsible for 1/3 of, at peak time, of the internet traffic in the US, and when they are as successful here, they will be more responsible. So we are because you are an expert for two-sided markets. The point which I want to go to is that they have a significant power out of their other systems, and it's by the way, the European Commission is looking on Google's market power in some areas, and on leveraging their market power from a search engine to other sectors and so on, and there's still a pending case. And so what we are talking, and obviously these companies have taken away a lot of the market value. That's the case, I like that they're innovative and they use their services, so we shouldn't blame them to be innovative, I think Spotify is the only example which has been successful from Europe, it's from Sweden. But I think what we should think about, and this is in the middle of this net neutrality debate, is do we really want to give them a free ride? Or do we, what in the US is now, do we want to ban two-sided markets? Seeing such a kind of development, and then to say, no, we want to ban on two-sided markets. And by the way, not berec. I think berec has a quite reasonable position on net neutrality and a quite sound position. But we know that there are other forces from the policy side. So I think the answer is not that OTT should not be possible, but again, it should not be a regulated environment. I'm not looking for a regulated environment, but we should look for a balanced possibility to monetize infrastructure investment towards bigger and bigger OTTs, and not to undermine that with a misguided net neutrality debate.
Okay. So another.
Well, in this discussion on OTTs versus other, I think what is important, by the way, I don't like the term OTT, and I see that berec also tries to avoid this term. I think what is the reality is that we are all part of a
Google
digital.
is no more an OTT.
Well, so then maybe we should not use the term OTT anymore. So it's this whole digital network industry, which is much broader than it was 20 years ago. And it's indeed, we need to look at the challenges from a holistic perspective. And that's why I think the initiative of berec are very good to see how we can have a more holistic view at how the market is functioning today, because that's very essential to make sure that we have the right balances between all the actors. And if we too heavily regulated our networks and not looking at what the other dynamics of this market is, we might just weaken one part of the value chain, and this is going to be detrimental for the whole European economy as a whole. Now, that doesn't mean, just like you, I think we should start to regulate the other players. There we need to be careful. We should also, well, your point, Jacques, what you made is about why is it happening in the US? I think we also can learn something from the US. I think in the US, well, the regulatory framework is lighter already than what it is in Europe, and that is also probably the reason why some of those initiatives did start rather in Europe than in the US rather than in Europe. So we should probably learn also a little bit from that, and we should have a holistic view on our digital economy, and probably where all players are subject to the same rules, but the rules we apply to this should be lighter than the rules we had 20 years ago, and that would create the best environment for investments and for innovation.
Just to add on that, I don't know whether it's a bit maybe a long shot at the SMP framework should apply to the OTTs or not. But at least if you look at the framework and at least the definitions, now it is designed that the service via the service provider, the services are regulated. So it excludes the immediately the impact of the rules of for other providers and services, while we see the trend that those services are provided independent to the access layer. So that needs to be considered at least at the next regulatory framework review. And what is the most important and what should be the guiding principle is that the same rules should apply for those same services. And it is not just for the framework part, but also there are some other beyond broader rules on consumers and on location services and others, which we see an asymmetry where there is a barrier for the telecoms operators to enter some of the markets which are now dominated by players which are not based on the European regulatory framework. So there's a need to take those latest developments into account, and the next framework review cannot avoid that to adjust according to that.
Okay. Yes.
I think that we can. We certainly should probably look at developments. But I think the most important point that it is actually possible to take the OTTs into account under today's regulatory framework. I think that was a key development in the context of the review of relevant markets, that basically the three criteria test has been adjusted to enable regulators to actually take those developments into account. So there is nothing, no further change in terms of market analysis is needed, because all the tools and the rules are already there. These developments can be taken into account. I think what is very important to note, however, is that the development of these internet service providers, wherever they come from, whether they come from the US or Europe, has nothing to do with access regulation of the fixed networks. The service layer is not effectively a regulated layer in Europe or in the US. As I think Matthias mentioned, at the services layer, there doesn't seem to be anything stopping companies like Netflix to actually enter. I don't really see where the bottleneck is. The reason why those companies come from the US, I think it has to do very much with the entrepreneurial attitude and rules in the United States. Has nothing to do with telecoms regulation in Europe or in the United States. I would actually disagree with the suggestion that we need industrial policy. I think that actually what we need, and I think what has been serving Europe very well, and the reason why we have had a huge success in traditional broadband, in fact, Europe is world leader in traditional broadband, is because we have had a very rigorous market-based approach. And I don't think that we should depart from that. We have competition law principles which have stood the test of time. And actually, I think in a time of transition, those are probably our best bets to stand the test of time, because they are independent of underlying technology. And I would, I think, reiterate that when it comes to, again, kind of fixed networks, the last mile is an enduring bottleneck, regardless of what is happening at the services layer. And I think if we do market analysis, we have to be very careful about not mixing pears with apples with oranges, but actually analyze, I think, what is in a certain market and analyze differently what is in a different market. We can have a plethora of services at the internet layer that will not make the access market competitive. I think that the proposition has been put forward that fixed and mobile might be substitutes. There is no evidence of fixed and mobile, certainly when it comes to data, to be substitutes. I think there has been a lot of argument about the US having much better 4G coverage than Europe does, more widespread 4G coverage. It is not even in the United States that the FCC considers that mobile would be a substitute for fixed broadband. Europe has less 4G, so I think we shouldn't even go there in the discussion. I would say holistic approach, in a certain sense, yes, but I think rigorous market-based approach and market analysis, I think, is the surest way forward.
Okay, so we have one reaction.
My name is Tony Shortall. I'm an economic consultant. I suppose I'd like to go back to a more fundamental issue, in a sense, about the difference between competition law approach to oligopolistic markets and ex-ante. Because in a sense, ex-ante regulation is more like an accelerated competition law procedure. And it's accelerated precisely because it avoids certain steps. So for instance, importantly, it avoids a kind of a welfare test, okay? So when we move towards oligopolistic markets, we could, as you said yourself earlier, we could end up with something which is more like a Bertrand type outcome, which is more like a monopoly outcome, or a Curno type outcome, something which is more tending towards a competitive outcome. And in a sense, we need to do a welfare test to see, ought there be an intervention? And I suppose my question is, if you look at oligopolistic markets, we start to get into a gray area where it's not immediately obvious. If we look at traditional ex-ante markets, it's very black and white, and we've set it up deliberately like that. In the absence of an intervention, there will be clear consumer harm. And I suppose we're now, as the markets have evolved and progressed, it's not so obvious anymore. We're getting into more gray areas. I suppose my question is, more fundamentally, should we be looking at, should this be dealt with ex post or ex ante? You know what I mean? Is there a case for dealing with oligopolistic markets ex ante?
That's mostly a question for the regulators, in a sense, that whether they want to abandon their own prerogative and leave them to antitrust authority. As it was mentioned, in some industries where you have some reason to think that there are some permanent market failures, there is a case for forward-looking ex-ante regulation. There is a question of whether there are still some permanent market failures. Some views that the last mile is a bottleneck for the fix. Industries that there are some scarcity in spectrum, so there are some particularity, and there is this global connectivity that would justify. Global connectivity is something that everybody takes for granted now, but if we remove any regulation, it's unclear whether it will survive. And one aspect of this thing is this on-net, off-net price discrimination in the mobile industry, which if you push it too far and you have a dominant mobile operator, may lead to effective lack of connectivity because it's so expensive to call the other network that you do only on-net calls. And I've been working on a case like that in Latin America, and so this may happen. So I think there are some rationale for addressing these issues ex ante. As you said, I think one of the main challenge, if you want to change the way you address collective dominance, let's say if you want to do the unilateral effect, even going to tight duopoly, let's say, the strict effect. Let's say we want to be able to address tight duopoly, so duopoly with strong market power, will be to determine what is the test. Because there is no guidance for that. So, I mean, competition, merger control, they just look at change in market power. They don't look at levels. So how do you measure, and what is the right level to determine that a duopoly is somewhat a concern? It's complicated. So the advantage of joint dominance is that actually the test is clear because we are talking about the conditions that would bring collusion and monopoly outcome. So it's easier to bring. And this, as I think, no, that would be a main challenge for regulators if they want to determine, they want to move away from the joint dominant.
I think there are already a lot of other forms, you know, because now we discuss ex ante ex post as a kind of a black and white, you know. And I think the disadvantage of ex ante, we did ex ante for unbundled local loop and for bitstream pricing and other things. But when it comes to NGA networks, I think it was very complicated and a lot, because when you do a real ex ante regulation, it ends up in a pricing regulation. Then you have to set the price, and you said to her, in the end of the day, you also need a cost model. You know? And when it comes to cost models for NGA, it becomes very tricky, because in the market sometimes, especially if you want to penetrate a market with new products, and we have the problem that the politicians only care about rollout of infrastructure. They care much less about take-up of usage, you know. And we have a gap, I think, also in Europe, but also worldwide, that people, oh yeah, we have 100 megabits there and 500 there, but the take-up is very poor. So you need also on the pricing side, and that was a problem in regulation, a price which is not realizing a premium, or not as much premium, otherwise you don't get market penetration. By the way, the whole mobile market, GSM and others, was also penetrated with handset subsidies and other things. So you have to enable that. So ending up for NGA in a bottom-up model with high prices is counterproductive for the whole market, you know. So what is a compromise, which is, by the way, done and realized, is a kind of exposed thing to say, okay, whoever is regulated and has significant market power, which is not the case in oligopolies, because not two parties, there's only a significant market, then this significant market power player can set his own price, but we do a retail minus regulation, for example, you know, which a lot of people, it's much more easier and say, is then there a discrimination, yes or no? But I don't want to go in a very detailed cost model, because in the end of the day, I end up with a premium price also for wholesale, which nobody can realize on the market. So my guess would be, if there's a significant market power, not an oligopoly, but then you have a lot of choices, you know, and exposed you are much more free what you do than if you end up in ex ante with cost models and very tricky things, because also the cost models are, let's assume, not always perfect.
But ex ante regulation may not be cost model or cost orientation. When we discuss about ex ante, it's more about sectorial regulation versus application of ex post competition policy law, which would be non-sector specific. And I don't know, French RCEP is something called Règlement des différends, which has a flavor of ex post intervention under some ex ante rules. So if you are not happy, then you go to see RCEP, and RCEP will make a decision, but with right, with wrong. And so that's always feasible. Okay.
May I also say something? Yes, sorry, I think so. I think you have put, Tony, the question, I think, about kind of how to tackle oligopolies, and I think that is much more the case. So I think in the fixed access market, we are much more dealing mostly with monopolies or duopolies, which you could argue is a tight oligopoly, but I think kind of genuinely oligopolistic market structure is more likely to emerge in the mobile market. And in the mobile market, we do not have access regulation, but I think that what is really important for the mostly we don't, but I think what is really important for the mobile market is, and to make sure that it remains competitive and it remains challengeable, is to have pro-competitive spectrum policies and to probably more coordinated across Europe than today, and to have kind of very pro-competitive spectrum designs, and not to have spectrum auctions which would squeeze out or push out of the market a viable challenger operators because they are left out of kind of very crucial spectrum bands. So I think it is not so much actually ex-ante regulation in the sense of excess regulation, but much more how you actually design spectrum policy. You did mention kind of global connectivity, and that reminded me of one issue which is not so directly related to oligopolies, but I think that there is one issue which is genuinely kind of much more global or certainly single market issue than local access and consumer markets or even the mobile markets, which is really very much business service provision. In this last part of the panel, we should be talking more about remedies, and I think there is one clear plea, I think, for the single market to provide better and more competitive services to business end users is to have more consistent availability of fit-for-purpose business-grade wholesale access products across Europe, so that multinational corporations in any sector can be better served with more innovative, more tailored services. And that is a bit of a more pan-European global connectivity type of issue, although with a different flavor. I think that...
So yes. What would be the tools to achieve that?
Apart
from merging... Pan-European mergers, which the European Commission is pushing.
No, I think, first of all, in the review of relevant markets, the Commission has actually recognized that business end users have different needs and therefore has defined a somewhat newer market which is the high-quality broadband access market. And I think that what is really, really needed, clearly, in order to serve a multinational corporation which might have sites, like, let's say, a car manufacturer, which might have sites in rural France where they do manufacturing, and in other parts of Europe they assemble their cars. In Hungary, let's say, they have salons everywhere in Europe. They have a headquarters somewhere. You need to connect that with a seamless, ubiquitous kind of communication solution, quite complex usually. Clearly, nobody will roll out a network that would just connect the presence points, the sites of that one company. So what you need in order to serve very effectively these multinational corporations is to have very consistent fit-for-purpose wholesale inputs across the whole of the EU, in the EU 28, so that you can actually kind of boost the productivity and the efficiency of European business end users.
So you want some standards?
I think that's kind of starting by actually kind of looking at the key technical characteristics that are needed for this, for kind of the fit for kind of the effective serving of business customers would be a very good point. So I think what we need is really kind of more harmonized, more consistent approach, and really the consistent availability of these, whether that will be specifically standardization. You could do that actually under today's framework, and I think this is clearly a plea to BEREC to work more on this issue.
Okay, so thank you, because we move to the second topic, so which is about remedies. So we take that as the first contribution to remedies. So we had some time now to discuss about remedies from. So here the topic is a bit more further. So basically the question is, what are your views about, so assuming that now we have identified, let's say, a joint dominant position, because we are talking about oligopoly, what are the key issues with remedies? What are the key remedies? Should we focus on access, which has been discussed a lot? Are there other dimension type of remedies? Should we go for structural remedies? And as a last question, which has not been discussed by, should we go for symmetric regulation of oligopoly, or should we maintain the asymmetric approach in this kind of situation? So I don't know. Maybe I should change a bit the order of intervention. So you will ask Matthias, do you want to intervene on?
Okay,
on this
for
issue?
me, it's a little bit difficult to answer this question because I think the starting point, and we had it explained, is that I think even in this market, a joint dominance is unlikely to arise because in the telecommunication market there is innovation and asymmetry, and this could be better achieved by competition authorities and others. So I think it's if you think the cases of joint dominance, and even if there is a collusion, there are tools to address it, and in this case we have also remedies in place. And we discussed that before, that competition authorities have also remedies if there is a collusive, and you mentioned that before, because they are the expert if there is a real collusion, But if there is an oligopoly itself, the outcome could be absolutely competitive. So
remind that joint dominance refers precisely
not
to
if there is a joint dominance and collusion, that's
joint
okay.
dominance refers to tacit collusion, which is different from cartel and explicit collusion. So the Commission has the tools to address cartels. They don't have the tools actually to address tacit collusion. I mean, if they do observe tacit collusion under ex post competition policies, there's nothing they can do.
Yeah, but I think...
And so that's precisely the case for ex-ante intervention. That's why they look at that at the merger review case, because that's the only time where the Commission can try to do something to limit the risk of collusion. But so on this point...
But I think we shouldn't lower the level for that. And I said it before, we have a system which is established by in the case of Air Tours and Impala, and I think this set of rules, I think what I strongly would underline, we shouldn't change this hurdle. And then if this hurdle is there, and if it is already a definition, as you know, and I think what our fear is, that people say it's too difficult to prove that it's, therefore we have to change the rules, and that is a way thinking from the end. Not from the beginning.
I can recast. I mean, people say it's too difficult to prove. I would say that the criteria are not met. So
they are not met.
The industry is not the best candidate for tacit collusion. I mean, there is lack of transparency, innovation, growing, and a fast-moving market share.
Yeah, but then we have got a problem. Therefore, I think, to be honest, I don't see a specific remedy discussion for oligopolies. So I think we have remedies in place when these conditions are met. In our view, to be very clear towards BEREC now, we think that these conditions are in place. We don't see any necessity to have a sector-specific new definition, and therefore we also don't see a need for specific remedies. I think the remedies which are in place are sufficient, and the preconditions we have in the European law is sound. So that's for sure.
Okay, so let me ask you a question. So now suppose that we have a case where we have a cable and an incumbent operator, and the cable is 60% market share. Should we do an SMP case on the cable and impose
that
access obligation on the cable?
I think there is no case yet. I think
we're talking about hypothetical
But if you have a market review, and I did market reviews in Germany, and all the other colleagues here in BEREC do constantly market review, we have to discuss about what market we are talking, and if this market is competitive, and if it's still competitive, let's talk about a wholesale market, bit market, or what the Commission did. See, Anthony Will always asks, what is about the end user market? Because that was, I think, a very good point when we discussed the new market review list, that was constantly underlined that we should not always look on the wholesale market, but on the end consumer market. And if the end consumer market for products and services is competitive, the market outcome, and I just got studies from, I think also Belgium market, where the consumers have better prices, more product quality, and more choice than they had before, So these, I think, are the relevant criteria. And then you can say, okay, if this end consumer market, funny enough, is very competitive, better quality, better pricing, and a lot of criteria, then there is even no necessity to regulate the wholesale market, you know. But I think the whole toolbox is in place, and it's, you're an academic, but the feeling I have about this undertaking is, and you mentioned it sometimes yourself, that it's a very static academic discussion, you know. And what it lacks is empirical underlining, and I think that's something with Berec. So we nearly leak empirical data which shows that there is a real problem. I don't see that there is a problem on this side. I see other problems, you know, what we already discussed with OTT and others, but not a significant problem with oligopolies. And I think we have tools enough in place to deal with that, you know. And therefore, by the way, I think the whole discussion was started from Opta in 2006, and then the Ecoris report. Now we have 2015, it's nearly 10 years I've gone. I even don't know if somebody of Opta is here, if Opta would have started it in 2015, you know, because it's in Germany we call it an old hat in my view, you know, and not something which is really the most urgent problem in this market.
So let's go on the...
Well, I can react very briefly on that. I think it's normal that it's more difficult to intervene in markets which are oligopolistic compared to monopolistic markets. I think that's logic, and I think I understand that the proof is much more difficult. But I think indeed the tools are there if there is really abusive behavior to intervene, and it will be a more difficult case to make. But that's normal, because I think the concrete examples of where you have more players really competing with each other, 2 players or 3 players, then it's unlikely that there is anti-competitive behavior. So it's normal that you will have a higher level of proof to see whether you should do something. And again, I think we made a point earlier on. I think it's also very important that I don't see why we should use different tools for the telecommunication sector than we use for the economy, other industries in general. Yeah. I think it's why would we use a lower thresholds in our sector and not in then other industries which are also known by concentrated markets because they are capital intensive, etc. etc. So that's why I think we need then this is a discussion then we have to have at a much higher level as to deal with how do we deal with all industries in Europe. And probably also, since this is a global economy we're working in, we need to place this also in a discussion at the global level. So how do we compare with what other regions are doing with our industry? So I think we need to be careful. But I think anyway, the discussion and the discussion we have today is an interesting discussion, and let's continue to discuss. But I think we need to be prudent with the way how we intervene in markets with multiple players that are already competing with each other. So that we should be careful there. Trust the market.
I have no question about it. We are in France, and we've been advocating market-based approach for 20 years, and we'll do it for 20 more years. Let's go to the mobile operators and let's see.
Well, maybe one idea is that we. At the beginning, we heard as the recent merger cases, the European Commission has imposed specific conditions and remedies before allowing the parties to proceed. And there's one comment, because in many cases that arise from the consideration that the prices would increase significantly without the remedies following the merger. And I just wanted to note on that, and also Tony on what to do with the oligopoly. And we don't think that the benchmark should be the perfect competition when assessing those cases. And we think that there should be other elements to be included in the analysis beyond price, broader consumer benefit. Should be considered, and we think that many of the concerns will be misplaced, were raised during those merger cases. However, we recognize there may be some cases for imposing remedies would help alleviate competition concerns for mobile mergers, but it's very important to ensure that those remedies do not produce unintended affects or undermine the benefits of possible merger. And one of it is we discussed the reduced investment incentives. Other one I would add is the underutilization of resources, which we've also seen that remedies might involve reallocating some network assets or reserving spectrum for new entrants who did not emerge in some specific cases and left valuable spectrum underutilized in certain cases. So I think that the analysis should be based on a broader citizen interest, and in any case, in case of mergers, the remedies should be carefully considered to not to undermine the benefits of a possible merger.
Thank you. So let me rebound on that. So Patrick Ray is not here, but if he was here, I guess he would say one thing is that if your concern is collective dominance, the worst thing you want to do is to restore symmetry. Symmetry is prone to collective dominance. So spectrum reallocation, capacity reallocation that would restore some form of symmetry may not be the right answer. Actually, of course, if you're concerned about unilateral effect, things are different. And then restoring symmetry may be good. So there is this tension between whether you think about the remedy. Okay.
Efficient network investments rather than very deep pockets are key to make sure that the mobile markets are vibrant. And I have already made my plea with regard to the business services market, which I think is a specific case that where actually a much more single market approach is needed to have consistent fit-for-purpose wholesale access products to serve European consumers. Sorry, business end users. I apologize.
Thank you. So where do we stand? It's the end, but I see some reaction in the back.
Ulrich Stumm from WIC. It looks to me that the discussion about applying joint dominance, and even more so actual efforts of regulators to apply joint dominance, may lead to a loss of legal certainty. And the reason is really that we have joint dominance under competition law. In particular, we could learn a bit from abuse cases where joint dominance has been abused. But in these cases, you could observe the behavior. If we are about to identify joint SMP in a regulatory setting, we are relying on pure conjectures. The question is whether two operators, say a telecoms incumbent and a cable operator, would have joint SMP, perhaps in the form of tacitly colluding, absent any regulation in access. Now, you cannot observe anything about this in the current situation because the incumbent is regulated and the cable operators may provide some sort of bitstream access or he may not. But it's very difficult to conjecture, even if you may use some structural factors about whether these two companies would actually be jointly dominant in a situation where regulation of the incumbent would be abandoned. So to me, that looks like there's a high degree of uncertainty about the outcome. Now, taking up Tony Schrottholz's statement that maybe, because it's so gray, let's move on and look at this from an point of view. But that could lead into a stop-and-go regulation. You may remove access regulation from the incumbent, but not introduce access regulation on incumbent and cable operators because you feel they are not jointly dominant. And then you could observe the actual behavior. And who knows, maybe in 2 years, regulators will say there is a problem we have to introduce because we have observed such
behavior that demonstrates that has been joint dominance over the last 2 years. So that could result in a stop-and-go regulation. And again, I would think that the resulting loss of legal certainty would not be good for the sector. So I have no clear-cut solution to that. But one obvious answer is some people are definitely to introduce symmetrical regulation and skip the whole discussion about whether somebody is jointly dominant or not.
What are the criteria to impose symmetric regulation? Which there is some. Let me first go to the floor. There is some other reaction.
Hello, Jesus Pascualena from CMNC. It's not a music band, but the Spanish regulator. I'm economist. After listening all of you, I have to say that I'm following the latest statement. I think that it's clear that we are getting into a grayer area, and of course it deserves to be properly assessed by all of the stakeholders. So it's clear that the discussion is not over. And I would say that still the parallelism between the joint dominance and the standard of proof that is currently used in mergers might be valid, because at the end we are facing situations in which we have, in most of the scenarios, markets that are subject to regulation, and the question is going to be more or less the same. What if you remove the current regulation? What if these two companies merge? So at the end, I would say that we can still try to follow the same rationale that is being applied in the context of mergers, because that question is more or less the same. And probably is the point that we need in order to follow the same rationale. So I think that, okay, collective dominance might be, yeah, it's true, there are differences, and it might be, might ensure more certainty, but the same change was made in the context of mergers, and it's not a matter of changing the rules. It's a matter that the new scenario may deserve a new approach, and this approach has been put into practice in the context of mergers. So, and the questions are not that different, and the analysis might be quite similar. You can see whether the access provider is a close competitor of the access-based competitor. So there are many issues that probably are not that different. So I think that it's clear from our side that in BEREC it's an important point an important issue still.
I'm trying to are you advocating to go to kind of significant impediment of competition, or
no? What I am saying,
because if we apply the merger procedure for a coordinated effect, this is extremely restrictive, and very often it's very difficult to apply, and as it was said, it's very prospective. It's very difficult to quantify. The unilateral approach is easy to quantify, but it raises serious issues for regulators. So.
No, what I am trying to say basically is that I think that there are still merits in the discussion, and there are still merits in making a comparison between what is being done in mergers and in the context of ex-ante regulation, and I don't see that is that different. And it's true that coordination is difficult to prove, but it can be made. Probably because in Spain we managed to do it in the context of the Market 15, and it was 3 operators. I don't know, maybe we might be a bit more optimistic, but yeah, I think that there is still scope. I am not that, so yeah, it's for me, oligopolies still deserve a close attention in the same way as it was done in 2004 in the context of mergers. I don't think that is that clear as some of the discussants were presenting the issue.
So let me make a comment on the previous comment, actually. I think, I mean, legal uncertainty is clearly a concern, and actually the answer is ex-ante regulation and regulatory commitment, so which is the thing I was mentioning before. If you are able to commit in advance on each particular situation, on what you will apply for, let's say, 4 years, 5 years, which is already a long commitment, then you gain a lot of legal certainty. Because under ex-ante regulation, most of the uncertainty is coming from new evaluation by the regulator and change in the rules, basically. So your command push to a bit to stick to ex-ante regulation, actually, and moving to ex post actually would be would raise even more legal uncertainty. Because who can predict what would be the ex post evaluation in 3 years, 4 years?
But also to Mr. Stumpf's argument, or this, to go to a symmetric regulation would be a fundamental change, you know, and it would change the whole basis of the system we have established. And I can't see, because when we talk about empirical underlaying, you know, there are a lot of studies around, and we underestimated that in countries where you had a strong infrastructure-based competition, the outcome for the market in all aspects are much better than if you have only an access-based regulation. You know, there are studies, I think Switzerland is an example for that, but also the Netherlands and others. So the infrastructure-based competition is based on a system that there is competing infrastructures, you know. And I think you underestimate, if this would be turned around, what an effect it might have on investors. Because you say, the whole concept of infrastructure competition is then completely undermined, especially when, you know, therefore it's wrong to say a monopoly and a duopoly is just the same. You know, we don't care. You know, even if I doubt it's a duopoly, but just to say monopoly, duopoly, access everywhere. It's a fundamental change, because the infrastructure competition would no longer function. And I see this effect already. You know, why are incumbents investing in Europe? And this has to be reviewed under, and why do they vectoring and other kind of things? Especially in those regions where they're partly under pressure from cable operators. So that's a market reaction. I've seen it in Germany, that if you see churn to cable, if you see, so this is a market reaction. If you grant everybody access to everything, why should you do any more infra? Then you have a completely other. Then I think it would be, Mr. Stumpf, it would be consequent to go to the Australian system. Then the government builds one network for everybody, and we only compete on services. You know, this is a concept. But why should somebody be a front runner in investment in areas where you have at least 2 fixed networks, when it's immediately open for your competitors? It doesn't make any sense. And it would undermine the positive outcome we had seen in Europe, and there are a lot of studies out of a poor infrastructure competition, and you shouldn't undermine that this would fundamentally change the willingness of investors. Those kind of investors who want to have open access, they can go, you know, it's possible. But you can go to rural areas and can be an open access operator, even with public subsidies. I have nothing against it, but that's not the business model of my members. Yeah? Why would you change the business model of my members? Then everybody can invest in fiber networks and build a monopoly. It's another business model. And if it's sound, why is it not happening? You know, I don't want to block this, you know, but it should not be imposed on companies who don't want this business model.
I think for the avoidance of doubt, I never advocated for opening up cable networks. I have never advocated actually for symmetric regulation. So I think that you're addressing this at me, and I've just not made those. I have not made those points. I think I have made it quite clear that actually I think if you look at market data, predominantly the access market is a monopolistic market, and I think that if we look at symmetric regulation, I would only look at symmetric regulation maybe as a complement where appropriate and necessary on the basis of a rigorous market analysis to actually S&P-based asymmetric regulation. So I think that, you know, you should really not address these comments at me. I think I don't think that anybody's actually arguing against infrastructure-based competition. I think that it is very clear, and there's a lot of evidence that infrastructure-based competition has been driving investments and a lot of benefit in the market. I think that my proposition, or my argument here, is that it is very clear, though, that there will not be, in many places in Europe, 3-4 competing fixed access networks. So you will not get to real, genuine consumer choice or effective competition via pure infrastructure-based competition in the fixed area. The market will be monopolistic or duopolistic at best. And our position is that 2 is not enough choice for European consumers. But that is not against, I think, cable, or not saying that cable is not contributing. But simply, I think duopolistic markets do not perform in terms of investments, innovation, and affordable prices. And you have yourself mentioned, I think, the issue with take-up. Take-up is, I think, a very important factor. Well, from a public welfare perspective, because we want a connected society and a connected economy, and it will be only connected if people take up actually the services. It is very important from an investor perspective, because you will only make a return on your investment if people actually take up the service and pay for your network investment. But I think it is also very clear that take-up in NGA has not been very good. In fact, it has been stagnating over the last couple of years. And I believe that that is because there is a lack of effective competition in NGA, because we do not have as effective wholesale access in NGA as we do in copper. We have seen in traditional broadband that take-up of ever-increasing high-speed services was driven by local loop unbundling and innovative new offers offered by challenger operators on the basis of local loop unbundling. If you look at the French market, the very classic example, 2003, when local loop unbundling has really become effective, the challenger operators entered the market. They have come up with the new offers, which are today staple offers. So the triple play, the famous French triple play offer, that was an product innovation by challenger operators. And in 3 years, and of course it was pretty affordable, which is also today in France. And over a period of 3 years, the market has grown by 400%. 400%. So that is really how competition is driving innovation, but also take-up. And I think take-up is very important for a lot of reasons. Sorry.
Okay,
stop
thank you.
here.
So I'm sure you disagree, but we need to stop.
Well, I think just 2 minutes. I think basically, well, 1 minute. Basically, I think it seems to be that we agree on a lot of things. So that's good. I think there where we can stimulate infrastructure competition, we should definitely do. I'm more optimistic on the places where we can achieve infrastructure competition. I think recently, I think the case in Portugal was very interesting. I think there was no access regulation of fiber, and what happened is that a company like, there was a threat, but basically the regulator did not regulate it. What was the result is that Vodafone decided to invest also in fiber networks. So I think let's not be too pessimistic on the potential that there is for real competition in access infrastructure. So I think the future looks bright.
So on this agreement,
yeah,
let's stop, and Fatima is going to conclude.